America today, there's about 1 million teenagers who are members of gangs. That's about 4% of the America's population of teenagers. So today we're going to be looking at what does being in a gang do to teenage mental health. So stay tuned for that. Gang life can really become all-encompassing for teenagers, and we want to understand why they're joining in the first place, and what is that doing to their mental, emotional development and their emotional health. Third is the leaving. Why is it so hard to leave? What about substance abuse within the gang lifestyle? Then how would we help teenagers kind of recover once they have gotten out of the gang? All those things we're having a conversation about in this video. The need to belong is especially strong for teenagers. All of us have this need to belong to a community, but for teenagers, it's kind of amplified during this developmental stage that they're in. 70% of teenagers who are in gangs, according to the American Psychological Association, are coming from fractured homes, abusive homes, poverty, all these things that really add to their emotional challenges they're facing. Their mental health, to begin with, isn't really ideal in this situation. They are in high stress environments. Gangs offer them some structure, some self identity, some self worth, these things that they aren't getting or aren't feeling in the home environment that they're growing up in. So they kind of gravitate towards the gangs where that need is being met. You know, Nikki Cruz wrote a book, Run Baby Run, back um, 1970s, I think, might have been when this book came out. And he was a gang member back in the 1950s. It hasn't changed really in terms of what draws them in. In his story, he talks about that sort of home life. He had come from Puerto Rico to New York, and it was the gang where he began to find love. It was gang where he began to find his voice, his power, his identity, and that hasn't changed today, right? So when we understand that, then we can begin to try to address it. And it's important to understand that the mental health of these teenagers before they get into gangs is really not very strong to begin with. Teenagers who now enter the gang life, because emotionally they weren't really that stable to begin with, are now drawn into a world that is, by its very nature, much more violent, much more fear-based, right? The whole power structure, the intimidation factor, that increases the stress level when you're living in fear more regularly, whether it's fear of rival gang members or fear even that you might do something wrong within that gang structure. That increases the whole stress level. It accelerates everything. And because the violence that you're witnessing and having happen to you, or maybe to somebody else that you see, teenagers in the gang structure are 4 times more likely to experience PTSD than their peers. So their mental health, once you get into a gang, gets worse. Increases in rates of depression and anxiety and PTSD and suicidal ideation, all that escalates when you enter the gang world. So their mental health goes from bad to worse. So if teenagers aren't doing well in a gang, they're feeling all this fear, anxiety, the stress, suicidal thoughts, all that, why don't they run away? Why don't they escape from it? And that goes right back to this culture of gangs where they use fear, retribution. The whole culture is built on loyalty to your gang. And the leadership is such that they will seek retribution if you try to leave. And that fear there is a powerful motivating force to stay in something that you are uncomfortable with, that you aren't feeling right about. And that is kind of what keeps them going. There are 60% of teenage gang members say it is that very thing, that fear of retribution and social isolation that keeps them in, even when they're feeling all those negative thoughts and those feelings while being in the gang. So that is really that issue at the heart of what's keeping teenagers in this bad situation. What do we know about people who are experiencing high levels of stress, anxiety, depression, mental health issues? They often try to self-medicate. So drug and alcohol use and abuse is rampant amongst teenagers who are involved in gangs. Research has shown that 60% heavily use drug and alcohol abuse, and a report done by the Washington Post showed that there was a dramatic 40% increase, an increase of what was already there in opiate use amongst gang members over the last 5 years. That was done in 2023, I believe. So all of that shouldn't come as a surprise. And when teenagers are getting trapped in that cycle of drug and alcohol abuse, and it becomes a downward cycle, so their mental health is really suffering, and their medicative ways of trying to deal with it exasperates the problem. Teenagers who are able to leave gangs, and sometimes it comes because they've been arrested, incarcerated, and are being put into programs where they're trying to help teens, break out of that, escape from that gang culture. There's healing that has to be done. Now, obviously, I talk a lot about mindset, and that's essentially what's happening, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy or other type of therapeutic interventions. Those interventions are really working on that mindset, those set of beliefs that they have about themselves and about how they react to things, and the unwritten rules of how to handle situations and relationships, and all of those things need to be restructured and redone. Then there may be addiction issues, right? The addiction to opiates, the addiction to alcohol, those issues have to be addressed and dealt with. There's a whole lot of layers and training and peeling back that has to happen. You've got to kind of a lot of cleaning up to do in the past. And when I talk about these different phases that we go through with mindset shift, cleaning up the past, well, there's a whole lot there that needs to be cleaned up. And there's also things that are probably going on in the unconscious mind, identity related, where people want to hold on to it because they've adopted some of these negative ideas as part of who they are. So that's why therapy and approaches to try to help them make that shift are indispensable. You can't do it without it. I want to tell you about Jared. Jared, I actually did an interview with on one of my podcasts, so you can find out. Now, he wasn't in a gang per se, not in the terms that we think of. He grew up in a rural part of the country, so there wasn't that sort of gang kind of structure that we think of that in inner cities. But as a teenager, all those other elements came in place. There was kind of that broken home kind of setup, and drug and alcohol use was there. And he found a group that he got involved with who did the same thing, escaping and trying to live kind of wild and crazy. And there's 12 different times that he was dead. He had to be resuscitated from overdoses, and he went to prison several times. And the last time, he said to me in the podcast that his mission was to really, this time, I'm going to learn how to be the best criminal there is, how to be the best at dealing with these drugs and stuff so I don't end up back here. It wasn't how to escape, it was how to get uh, better at doing what he was doing. But in that environment, he got into a program that enabled him to shift his mindset. He's now actually a successful entrepreneur and been clean for a number of years. While many of us, kind of gang life is it's away from us, we don't necessarily experience or see it. It's a fact for many teenagers, 4% life, and the influence those gangs have on other teens can really be dramatic. So this is an important conversation that I hope there's some lessons there we can apply, whether it's related to gangs or not. I encourage you to subscribe to our channel, but I also would love to hear your stories. And even if they aren't like gang specific related, there's some parallels. So share your stories. Tell us some of these experiences growing up, and how those kind of home lives that lead people to gangs may have influenced you and what you did about it. Love to hear those stories. Until the next time, go out and live life to its fullest. Enjoy life. I'll see you in the next video.